but yeah, it's what happens if the other person has so much shit they're coming to the table? So let's say, for example, with our family, right? That's one of the biggest places. Now, we're not in control of their inner work. We're not in control of how they show up and how they're doing their healing or not. So yeah, it's when you tell me like, I need to be able to see the inner child in my mom or my sister when they're constantly like yelling at me and, saying the shit they are, like, how do you expect me to communicate with them? This is where it's important to understand who you're communicating with. Remember in the Gauntlet, in like the week of resentment, right? And the biggest part of what we talked about is creating an expectation for someone that you know they're capable of, that you believe they're capable of. That's what leads to not having resentment. Resentment is expecting them to treat you better, speak to you differently, show up in a way that you really want them to, but being perpetually disappointed that they can't. So take, for example, in this, a really good thing to use in this situation is parents, siblings, uncles or aunts, or even your bosses. Sometimes you can't have really authentic, vulnerable communication with them to say, hey, I recognize this is what you're hurting from. I think maybe, you need to visit this and discuss this so that we can have better communication. You can do it with your partners more often because that's what you expect to do with each other to grow in a relationship. But with your family, sometimes it's hard. Most likely, if you tell them, hey, I'm doing this inner work thing and it's really helped me out, you should try it. They're going to be like, are you part of some fucking cult or some shit? They're like, I'm definitely not trying stuff. Like, you can go do whatever you want. I'm just going to smoke and sit on the couch and like drink my beers and my communication's perfect. So you can fuck off. So you can't really control how they show up in that moment. But if your aim is to build that relationship better with them, and a lot of us have parents with their own heavy set conditioning, whether it's culturally. So if you come from a country or a place where they have a certain set of conditioning that doesn't allow them to step into certain emotions, like, for example, a lot of our dads are not used to having a strong emotional response, maybe even some of our moms. And so when we're communicating with them, if we're like, you never hear me, you never understand me, you never give me a hug, we're setting ourselves up constantly for disappointment in those moments. So with certain family members, with certain people in our environment, it's very important to understand, who am I communicating with? What makes it kinder on your own soul when you're going into communicating with them is asking yourself, before you even you can't do this when you're getting into a trigger. You can't do this when you get really dysregulated. But communication is all kinds of communication, right? Like when you're in a good place, a happy place, all of it. So before you get into, let's say you're going home for Thanksgiving, let's say you're meeting, or your mom's going to call you on like in a few hours, or your dad's going to show up or something like that, or a friend's going to call you. Ask yourself this question honestly. What can I authentically expect from this family member? What can I authentically expect from my dad, from my mom, from my sister, from my boss, from somebody else? And write down that list. Be very honest with yourself. This has actually nothing to do with them in that moment. It has to do with what you're expecting of them. I'll tell you why this is so important when it comes to communication. So you write down this list, right? And you write down this list saying, I don't think I can expect my dad to really hug me at the end of this call. So if I'm crying, or if I go up to him and I tell him I'm really hurt, I don't think I can expect my dad to say, I really understand you, child. All I'm going to expect my dad to say is like, that happens in the world. It's a really tough place to live in, blah, 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 for example. So if you write what you can expect from them, you'll realize a lot of these things that you want from them, you honestly have to put aside. It's difficult to be able to, or it's difficult to have to say that, especially as a relationship coach. But that's what's going to lead to a better relationship with them in a different way than you think. So, okay, you put some of these things aside. What can I expect? I can expect my dad to bond with me over XYZ. I can expect that when my mom is dysregulated, she's probably going to bring up conversation about my relationship history or my academic history or some other shit. I can expect that when I'm hanging out with my uncles or whatever, they're probably going to talk about politics. I can expect that when my boss is in a bad mood, he's probably going to like shit on me, or not shit on me, but he's going to come at me with a lot of pressure. So you write down all of these things of what you can expect. Remember, this is not what you can tolerate. We're not there yet. We're asking ourselves still, what can I expect from these people? I'll get to the relationship like with a partner in a bit, but this is what you can expect with family, friends, etc. You can even use these with a partner, to be honest, especially if it's a long-term relationship. And you know someone, you've tried certain things, or you know someone's kind of set in certain ways. Next step, after you ask what you can expect from them, you ask yourself, what do I really want from them? Now, it's important to ask yourself the second step, because when you write down the second step, you may actually notice that the second step and the first step may not align at all. Some of the things you could actually possibly get from them if they are capable for it. For example, I was dealing with this one client who really wanted, I brought this example a lot, her dad to hug her. So that was an expectation. That was a desire she wanted. She expected also her dad to hug her when she talked about like certain traumas, et cetera, et cetera. But what she didn't realize was the third step of, am I asking for it efficiently enough? Am I creating space for it? Is my dysregulation like cutting it off? She didn't realize that that third step was actually preventing her family member from showing up and loving her or in that way of a hug. So she didn't realize that the third step of her own energy was preventing the partner, the friend, the family members, whoever else, from actually showing up for her in the way she desired. So they were capable. It was a fair expectation, but the disconnect was because of her ego. So you've got these two steps. Second step of what I want them to show up as, and you have to be able to see if that's a match for you or not, if that's actually a way they can show up or not. And then the third step is, this is my favorite part. If the two of them align, so if you have expectations and wants that kind of align, if you can realistically see they can show up in certain ways, the third step is, how can I vulnerably and authentically ask them for this? How can I vulnerably and authentically create the space for this? How can I vulnerably and authentically show up in a manner that allows them to feel safe? As long as this does not come at the cost of abandoning yourself, the cost of abandoning your own principles, remember this. You all are more powerful because you're doing the inner work. You're more aware. You're more capable of disarming your ego. You're more capable of being vulnerable. You're learning the tools, the tips, the tricks of this trade. They may not be able to do it, but you can. That doesn't mean that you're a doormat, but that means you're actually more powerful and more flexible. So if you can, in this space, before you get into this conversation, so before you head home for Thanksgiving, before you're having this conversation with a family member or whatever else, if you can create the energy that allows them to also feel safer, to have this conversation, to go deeper, to create these moments, just watch how differently that other person will show up for you in that particular moment. Now, these are not generally moments around like triggers. These are not moments around, like I said, challenges, but communication expands throughout. In fact, what you do in your relationships when you communicate, when things are actually going well, and what you do in relationships when things are like, there's no real fluff, you don't have to throw in romance, so it's like the day-to-day stuff, they actually support you in moments when the triggers happen, when the challenges show up. Why? Because you're setting a continuous platform. You're setting a continuous like relationship dynamic between the two of you, so that when shit hits the fan, when things get really rough, you're able to cope with it much better.
Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.